Vinny Milkus Outdoors. I'm doing this video about what to throw in June. We're going to talk about, I'm going to go over 5 baits. I'll just throw 5 out of the top of my head. 5 baits that really work in June. And we're doing this because we're now at the end of May. Various parts of the country are in different stages, whether it be in the spawn, post-spawn, just summer patterns. And June is one of those funky months where fishing can be really good, or it can start getting kind of difficult. In the north, we're still in a spawning situation in a lot of the areas. You still have, especially largemouth, a spawn is starting to wrap up, but it's still there. In the mid, I guess you call geographic range of the states, you're in a post spawn and you have that like bluegill, sunfish type spawning situation that's coming on, and that becomes a very big player. You have in the south, you have that bluegill spawn, and bluegill, you sunfish. I'll just put them all in an umbrella term there, because sunfish will spawn at various stages. You might even have multiple spawns in some areas of the country, but once that they start really nesting, and you have that like almost pot marked areas out, you can bet that there are bass that really target that, especially larger bass. Even in shad type lakes, you start getting at least a segment of the bass population that will really hit that. So when we go into June, it's also a time, like me as a fisherman, I travel up north to down south. I fish all sorts of things, so there's certain things that I have tied on consistently this time of year. And we'll start with the funnest one, is I always have a topwater bait. Now, you talk to a lot of guys, and this time of year when you have that sunfish spawn coming on, that prop bait really seems to work fairly well. I'm more of the stick bait type guy. The Sammys, I throw that old school Sammy, so that's my first go-to bait. That standard, I think it's the 100, and sometimes at certain lakes I'll drop down in size, but that's more as we progress through the summer. But June especially, I'll just throw that standard Sammy, and I change that up with varied water colors. So out west, where you got a lot of clear water, or in the Midwest where you have some of those, I'm throwing those transparent baits, and depending on cloud cover, like there's so much nuance in fishing, it's crazy. It shouldn't be that difficult. It's really not. So a lot of times I just stick with certain colors, whether certain ghost minnow transparent bait, or that American shad for the more like dense color that they can see when it's super cloudy. But anyway, throwing that transparent bait, clear water. When you get into that more stained water, I go with like a solid opaque white, or maybe even throw some different colors. Maybe you want to go with kind of a bluegill color, but I think when the fish is actually looking up at it, a topwater bait, one, if it's in clear water, you want just enough of it that he knows something's going on top. And in those other stained or dirtier water, you want him to be able to get the silhouette of it so that he can more effectively target that bait. Now, the second bait that I'll throw in summer, and you throw this pretty much every year. I start transitioning from using the jig a little bit to throwing the Texas rig. So I always have a Texas rig on in June with like a beaver style bait. You might hear different things from different guys, but I found it very effective throwing that beaver just in a Texas rig, especially when you start getting into wood. You're starting to flip around wood. You're looking for those bluegill beds, and you're just going around covering some, just spicy looking stuff. And there's still bass up there. The water temperatures aren't so hot unless you're further down south where they're pushing off shore a lot. When you're in the Midwest and north, there's still a lot of fish up there cruising around. So I'm throwing that Texas rig, especially in the shallow cover, woods and grasses, whatnot, a lot of wood, rock, even rock. You throw that around, it's a crawdad imitator. But anyway, nice beaver with a couple different colors. I like that. What is it? Man, they got some cool names for if you use Reaction Innovation, because that's the original, and that's who I typically use. But depending on where you're at, I like, for some reason, like if you're throwing around the Midwest, that was it, not mad craw, but it's kind of like you have that pumpkin but with a bluish hint to it. that's pretty good. And if you know anything about the crawfish species, which I've done crawfish videos, might do another one, but there's some that have a bluish hue to them, especially in the Midwest. Now, if you go out west, you're looking at more your browns, and in a lot of the other countries, you can't go wrong with like a pumpkin or those browns and watermelons. When you go further, like towards California, in some of those grassy areas like the Delta or whatever, those crawfish tend to be really red. In a lot of the areas you get the country, depending on the time of years, you'll have the little orange pinchers, but the reddish, you can go to that black and red color. It does really well. But anyway, just a beaver style bait with this simple text rig, or to caveat off of that a little bit, the free rig. So I'll do you throw a free rig as well. Interchangeable to me. So either one of those has been really effective. We'll just call it a Texas rig at this point. And depending on where you are, I throw a real small glass bead behind that tungsten sinker. But I've done really well on that, just getting to where you're just flipping. My other bait that I like to throw in the summer is, and this has become June, it's become a lot more of a staple, but it used to not be. People used to throw this away in the tackle box or in the rod locker and not get it out until next spring, which is a jerkbait. But the jerkbaits that I throw are typically, they're smaller crankbaits that are mid-level crankbaits, but they are a jerkbait. And they used to make one for Lucky Craft called the Bevy Shad. Now, you can find a lot of these other ones. Mega Bass makes some stuff. I think it's the Shad X. You can throw various mid-level crankbaits. The DT series probably has a good one. You can get it to suspend. So I like the suspending still, or maybe a really slow riser, depending on your cover. But I throw a crankbait like that, and like we've gone over before, where they're in clear water. I like those transparent colors, those shady looking things. Or if you're in a bluegilly area, you get something that's kind of looks like that. So. Or if you're in the area of the country where you have that stained water, whatever, your chartreuses and still your purples and colors that are really stand out, or black and blues or whatever, those kind of things. A little hint of red still, because you're still not super deep in that water column. But anyway, so that's another good one that does really well. We go to another bait, which I think the fourth bait. I throw a drop shot still. I have my drop shot, and I'm going to throw another bait in there after, because I'm going to talk about this, but this is more area specific of the country specific. But the drop shot, you can't go wrong with the drop shot. In the summertime, I'll flip a drop shot. I guess they call it Bubba shotting or whatever. But even on spinning rod, I always have that on there. And with what I end up doing with my drop shot is I just kind of find, I start off with a certain level or certain leader, obviously, where the thing is, but then I always have a number of different baits, colors, because you can usually find out what they really like. Now I'll throw, in the summer, I'm not throwing anything gigantic. I'm 3-4 inch baits. I'm throwing a lot. I'll just throw out a company and a bait that's really effective at this time of year for the June area. Now, different parts of the summer you might do something different, but I'm throwing that Robo Worm, the FX series stuff, the FX Sculpin, especially in various colors. I'm just trying to feel out what they really like. A lot of times they like that shad, which is kind of like a silver black, weird, the FX color, or like a summer shad sometimes is really good. And you can still throw those standard colors like the Aaron's Magic and Morning Dawn. Those still work, but I like those kind of like shad color type baits. And you can also, there's other baits that work just as well. I'm just throwing that out there. These are the baits that I use, the pick. When you have a drop shot on, you're doing that. A lot of guys will say, throw a shaky head or whatever, maybe later on. But this is my top 5 June baits. Anyway, so we get into this other thing. The fifth one. This is probably the most important one that I'll throw, and then I'm going to throw an extra one. It's area specific. But anywhere I go in June, or from here on out, throughout the fall, the winter, I have a weightless Senko on, and I'm a Yamamoto one, because I still think they have the best action. I still think Yamamoto makes that formula seems to work, but a stick bait, I guess you could say. I'll call it a Senko because I like the Senkos, like a 5-inch Senko. in the north, maybe a 4-inch, still a 5-inch. I'm throwing it with that white, with the, I don't know the colors, excuse me, the white with the glitter in it, or the laminated shad, or even, it seems like I go away from the pumpkins about this time of year, and I'm throwing that, or I'm throwing various shades of that color of white in that shady looking things, and I'm using them as like a jerk bait, but I'm also letting them die and sometimes dead sticking them. It's such a versatile bait, and when the metabolism, the fish is up, it's super effective, and you tend to really, when the fish start getting into that little bit more of selectiveness, they tend to not be able to resist the Senko. I guess that's 5 baits. Now we're gonna, because I talked about the bluegill spawn, I haven't given you a real bluegill bait, but I got 2 that are, one's area specific, and I have another bait, and that is a big glide bluegill bait. Especially early morning, there's been a number of tournaments I've been to about this time of year where guys, especially early in the morning, hitting those bluegill beds, will throw big glides that are intended to imitate a bluegill, and they end up scoring like a 5-6 pounder, like a real nice, couple of nice fish, maybe 1-2 nice fish that are roaming those bluegill beds. So the evergreen bluegills swim bait's pretty good. There's bull shooters and stuff like that are also good, like little glide baits you can throw. There's a number of private individuals with glide baits that make glide baits that really look good for as a bluegill imitator, even just a plastic bluegill swim bait. But I'm specifically targeting that glide bait, that bluegill glide bait. And then let's go in the area, because we're already almost 12 minutes. We'll go to the area specific one. So if you fish out west, some of the canyon reservoirs or whatnot, when we hit June is when I really start pulling this out, and all the way through till probably November, and the further south you go. And that is the spider grub. Now, a lot of guys throw that a lot of other places, but I'll throw the spider grub, football head jig. Specifically now, the Perfection lures by the David Dudley thing, their little stand-up thing, I'll throw that. Yamamoto Chompers I like Yamamoto's, but Chompers make some spider jigs and a number of colors. Throw that, that camera, and you throw that watermelon, red fleck, purple fleck, just get a couple different colors like that look like crawdads, and I go around with that. I've caught everything on that, but especially on these rocky canyon reservoirs with clear water, going to like the Meads, the Powells, the Havasus, the Columbia River type things, the Southern California, you can go into the Midwest, Table Rocks even. I'd imagine they work fairly well in that West, West Texas, Central Texas, Southern Texas type lakes, Elephant Butte, New Mexico, all the saltwater chains in there. All those areas right there are ripe for the spider jig. In the Colorado too, those small lakes in Montana, some of those lakes too. I hate to say that. Idaho, all those lakes that are in the West, Midwest to West, that spider jig really is a dynamite bait. I'm not too familiar with throwing it on the football head and stuff in the East Coast, but anywhere where there's a lot of rocky shoals, like I said, clear water, a spider jig is money, especially on a football jig. And like I said, that Perfection lure stand-up head, it's dynamite, and I've done really well on that. So that's it. That's June. I know I said 5 baits, and I went into like 7, but those are things. I have a lot of rods. I fish with, there's rods all over my deck, because every tool has a purpose, right? And there's a lot of times I come to situations on the water, I'm like, okay, this is where I need my whatever 3/8 drive with a 1/2-inch socket. All right, I need to put that tool to work, and that in fishing terms, that might be a 5-inch Senko and whatever natural shad with whatever 2/0 hook, or it might be the Sammy Topwater, whatever, blah blah. It could be whatever the case is, or this looks really right for me to roll a rigger wart down this, or whatever it is. This is those tools have a place, and so I always have that stuff on there. But in June, in particular, I have those style baits on my deck, easily accessible because I'm throwing them all the time. And there's usually those are the standard tool. That's like your 3/8 drive wrench. That's your 9, whatever. What is it? The 10 millimeter that's always used everywhere. Those are your 10 millimeter sockets that you need consistently, right? Anyway, talk to you later. Peace.